Dear respected Thai, dear Sangha, let us begin by coming back to ourselves, to our breath, enjoy our breathing. So you may like to bring your attention to your breathing. It's easy to focus on the breathing if we're not distracted, so it's good if we can close our eyes. Bring our attention to the rising and falling of our belly. We can take deep breaths so that we can really relax our whole body, our shoulders, our neck, our back, lower back, our arms. Offer ourselves a gentle smile so that our face, the 300-something muscles on our face, can be relaxed. We will hear the 3 sounds of the bell. We allow the sounds of the bell to sink deeply into our body, into every cell of our body, so that it can wake us up, wake up our capacity to be present, capacity to be mindful, to be kind, and to be peaceful. Dear respected Thai, dear Sangha, today is September the 23rd in the year 2015, and today is our second day in Magnolia Grove for the retreat. The time is now. During this retreat, we will focus on the 4 Noble Truths. And we will also weave in the practice of mindful breathing based on the discourse on the full awareness of breathing, which we have read this morning. And The first noble truth, which I've written up there, is ill-being or suffering. The second noble truth is the making of ill-being, the causes and conditions that have brought about ill-being or suffering. And the third is the cessation of suffering, the cessation of ill-being, which is really the presence of well-being and happiness. And the fourth is the path of practice that leads to happiness, to well-being. And today I will talk about the first noble truth, which is suffering, the presence of suffering. But when we explored the first noble truth, suffering, on again. So when we explored the first noble truth, we will also tap into the other Okay, on again. I'm back. I guess I have to turn on and off all the time, huh? So when we explored the first noble truth, we will also touch the other three truths, because the nature of the Four Noble Truths are interconnected. One contains the other. And so during the retreat, my brother and sisters, we explored deeper into the other truths. And so we will have, by the end of the retreat, we will have a really clear understanding the noble truths, but also how to practice with these truths, how to use the basic teachings such as the teachings on mindfulness of breathing to embrace, to understand these truths and to work with these truths. Why are we here? Why are we coming to a retreat like this? During this tour in Blue Cliff Monastery in New York, as well as here, and also our retreats in Germany, our center in Germany, the size of the retreat has downsized enormously, more than 50%. And some people told me that they appreciate it so much that the retreat is getting smaller, that it's less crowded. And that one friend told me that people are coming for the Sangha and the teachings, the Dharma, and not for Thai. And I thought, well, if you really look deeply into the Sangha, you see that every one of us is a continuation of Thai. Thai is present in every one of us. Thai is present with us in this retreat. I came up here feeling a bit nervous, and I called on to Thai. Thai, please come and give the Dharma talk. So, Thai is really present. And so if you look deeply into the Sangha, Thai is there. You don't need the physical body of Thai to know that Thai is there. That every one of us, not just the monastics, but also lay friends, lay practitioners, are a continuation of Thai as well. And the Dharma, the teachings that we practice, the teachings that Thai had expounded, the discourses that Thai had translated, are Thai. Thai's presence are very tangible. And so you actually come in for Thai as well. Not just for the Sangha and the Dharma, but we'll come in because of our love and our respect and our faith in Thai. But I feel every one of us has a reason for coming to a retreat like this. And whatever reason that had brought you here, I think we are all looking for happiness and peace. We lack joy, happiness, and peace in our life because there's so much suffering. Suffering in our body, suffering in our mind. And I think we are here, just like the monastics, we come to this path because we want to learn how to manage our suffering and how to cultivate joy and happiness. This is our deepest desire, right? Our desire to be happy and to suffer less. I look into myself. Last night we were encouraged to go back to ourselves and touch our suffering and touch suffering of our beloved ones and those around us. And what I see in myself and what I see in people around me is that there's a wounded child in every one of us. There's something that's really interesting that I have read somewhere. It was in a book on consciousness. And the author of this book uses muscle testing to calibrate the different level of consciousness. And he said, in every one of us, we have never really developed past our childhood. And if we're lucky, we developed past our adolescent stage. And I thought, wow, he said, we may be really sophisticated in our speech, in our way of, socializing, interacting with other people. But deep down, we're just really a child inside. And it's, for me, that's the wounded child in ourselves. It's the child that brings so much suffering. And the child that has suffered a lot. And if we don't come back to this wounded child inside ourselves and take care of the wounded child, we will never be able to develop past our childhood stage or our adolescent stage. And so the practice is to come back to ourselves and recognize that there is a wounded child inside ourselves, so that we can take care of her. We can be her caretaker, her mother, to embrace her, to love her, to take care of her, that she had not had a chance to experience as a child. And every one of us feel that there's a hole in our soul. It's as if something is missing. It's as if we would not feel complete if we don't have this or that or that. So we're running all over. We're running in 10 directions just to look for things to fill up this hole. I think some of us are coming to the practice because we want to feel this hole. We think that come into the practice, come into a spiritual path can really help us feel this hole. But why is suffering holy? The Four Noble Truths, the first truth is suffering. Why is suffering considered holy? When I first learned the Four Noble Truths, this question came to mind. It's like, why is it holy? I mean, it's so uncomfortable, right? To have this pain in myself. It's not just a pain in my mind, but it's like tension in my body and a feeling of just really darkness inside. Have you been to a place in yourself when you feel like your mind is really dark? Anybody? I have. It's a place that is so dark that it seems like there's no light at the end of the tunnel. It seems as if there's really nothing worth living. And it's painful. But why is it noble? When we look into our suffering, when we stay with our suffering, we discover that there are causes and conditions that are brought about our suffering. We understand deeply why and how the suffering had come about. And it's coming in touch with the rawness of our suffering, with our vulnerability, our fragility, that we can tap in something else inside ourselves, and that's love for ourselves. remember when I first, during my first few years as a nun, I had this suffering that I really didn't understand how it came about. I mean, I can't really pinpoint to the causes and conditions of my suffering. And sometimes I would go up to the Plum orchard and just cry by myself. Just really feel that suffering. And what I realized was that most of my suffering comes from my childhood and my adolescent years. When I didn't know how to deal with things that come my way, such as, judgment or criticism. And I felt so much compassion for myself because I was vulnerable. I didn't know how to deal with all this suffering. And so the suffering was still there. And being able to come and touch my suffering, I tap into this source of compassion and love in myself. And it's when I can touch my suffering that I can be in other people's shoes, really understand why they suffer. And so understanding our suffering, coming back to our suffering, helps us to cultivate compassion, cultivate understanding. And suffering also is noble because it takes us deep into ourselves. That it takes us to a place that's more than just the everyday comforts, needs. And most of us, it takes us onto a spiritual path, like this one that we are on together. And so, Thai talked about mud and lotus, and I just really love this metaphor that for lotus to grow, that it needs the mud, because without the mud and muddy water, lotuses cannot grow. And it's the same thing with our suffering, is that we need suffering to cultivate compassion, to cultivate joy and happiness. At first we thought, how can suffering and joy and happiness go together? But with the practice of meditation, we see that these two are interconnected. That suffering is needed to cultivate joy and happiness, compassion. There's a tendency in ourselves to run away from suffering, to avoid suffering. We like to seek pleasure, and we run as far as we can from suffering, right? And many of us have done quite well with this, running away from ourselves so that we don't have to confront the suffering inside ourselves. And we forget, we neglect to recognize that to recognize the goodness in the suffering. And so when we come to a practice like this and learn the Four Noble Truths, we're reminded that suffering is good. That it's good to stay with ourselves and to stay with our suffering. And when we stay with our suffering, what we notice is that there's certain kind of pain and suffering in ourselves that are just really necessary. We experience a pain. But we tend to exaggerate this pain. The Buddha taught the second arrow, that we have a pain in our body, in our mind. But we shoot in, that's the first arrow, and we shoot in more arrows to that pain, and that pain is not just double, but it's 10 times or even 100 times more intense. And so we're shooting arrows, second arrows to our suffering, to ourselves all the time. So there's a saying that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And that if we can just stop this second arrow, then the pain is bearable. It may not be as bad. One example in my life, I've just noticed recently, is that I'm coming to an age where I'm feeling a lot of pain in my body. People said I look much younger than I am in my age. But I'm starting to feel fatigue, tightness in my shoulders, pain in my lower back, my legs. And I can't sleep at night like I used to. I used to sleep anywhere, anytime, even when we do slow walking meditation, I would just fall asleep. And I was so good at sleeping in sitting meditation. My siblings would notice. But now I'm coming to a point where I couldn't sleep so well anymore. And one of the brothers said, you are seasoned. You are aged. It's a loving speech of saying that I'm getting old. And at first I'm feel really frustrated and irritated with my suffering. And also with my pain and with not able to sleep at night. Sometimes I would go to sleep and then wake up in the middle of the night and wouldn't be able to sleep again for 2 or 3 hours. Anybody has that experience? Yeah? We're seasoned. And so I thought, okay, so how do I work with this? How do I deal with this pain in my body now? And with the fact that I couldn't sleep so well anymore at nighttime. So one of the things that I practice is not to shoot second arrows to this pain and discomfort that is in my body and this lack of sleep. I look at my pain and I thought, it's not so bad, really. I mean, there are people who have much worse pain than I have right now. There may be people my age who are already having cancer or really serious illness. So my situation is not so bad. And the second thing I realized is that this pain in my body as a messenger, it's a reminder that I have a body, a human body, just like everyone else, that is vulnerable. And that is of the nature to grow old and to die. You know, when we're young, we never think that we're going to die or we're going to grow old, that it's going to be 2 or 3 more centuries down the road that I will grow old or that I will die. But the pain is a reminder for me. It's the pain, it's the right dose for me. Right now, this is what I need. I need this right dose of pain in my body, in my mind, so that I can really appreciate the fact that I'm still alive. That I can do something now. I can put more time to take care of my body by doing exercises, by eating well, by being in moderation with my consumption, but also with when to go to sleep instead of staying too late at night, that I have to go to bed early now. Even if I may not be able to sleep, I just had to lie there and breathe. And so, and last night I couldn't sleep very well. Maybe it's the Dharma talk that created anxiety in my body. But I woke up, my sister woke up, and I woke up, and I couldn't sleep until like maybe 3 hours later. And when I was about to fall back to sleep, so I woke up at about 1:30, and I didn't go to bed until like after 3:30. And then the bell was invited at 4:30, and it woke me up. Did anybody hear the bell, or was it just my imagination? Yeah. The bell was invited at 4:30. The bell team must have mistaken the time and thought it was 5:30. And so, but then, you know, I woke up at 5 or 5:15 because the alarm of my roommate went on for a long time. So I slept very little. But that didn't really bother me because I'm just used to that. And usually when I wake up in the middle of the night, I thought this is really a good opportunity for me to look inside my body, to look inside my mind. The things that I cannot resolve during the day becomes like a nagging feeling inside myself. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to take this time to look into that nagging feeling to see what it is. And a time when I am not distracted by anything or anyone, and I can just be with my breathing and be with the experience of what unfolds in my body. So that way it gives me energy to function during the day. Of course, I had to take a little nap before I come up here because I was afraid that my head would go blank, you know, when I'm sitting up here. And so, when we practice to stay with our suffering and just recognize it for what it is, just mere recognition that there is pain here or pain there in our body, in our mind, then we can just put down the second arrow. We can put down the fear or the stories we create in our head with this pain that we have. We can stop the story that maybe this pain is a sign of a tumor or cancer or something like that. And it's by being able to put down this fear or the stories that we create in our head around this pain makes the pain more bearable. And it becomes a lesson, really. In the community, sometimes I have very difficult siblings. And I always think suffering will be her teacher. Suffering will be her greatest teacher. Because suffering teaches us so much. It humbles us to the core. And it helps us to be in the skin of other people. But how do we embrace our suffering? We need some kind of tools to work with our suffering. So this is when the exercises of mindful breathing becomes really useful. Maybe we listen to one sound of the bell before we continue. Enjoy your breathing. Enjoy coming back to yourself. Just a question, how many of you are here for the first time? A lot of you, thank you. Wonderful. Inside every one of us, there's an innate potential to wake up. We call it the seed of mindfulness. We heard about mindfulness yesterday. My brother and sister shared about mindfulness yesterday. And the three very important capacities in ourselves, seeds in ourselves: mindfulness, concentration, and insight. And these three energies helps to wake us up to the present moment. So mindfulness is really the light inside. The light inside to help us see into the darkness of our mind. The light that once it's lit, it helps us to see and to understand. And what's really powerful with mindfulness is that once we shine the light of mindfulness onto something that is painful, such as pain in the body or suffering in our mind, it comes and it surrounds this pain. It embraces this pain. And then it sort of loosens up this pain. It lessens the intensity of the pain to the point where we can live in peace with the pain that is no longer too overwhelming. But when we shine this light of mindfulness onto an experience of well-being, such as love, for instance, or well-being in our body, it helps to prolong that experience and strengthen the roots in the depths of our consciousness. And so that's how mindfulness can really help to heal us, because it embraces and soothes and transforms the pain and the suffering. And concentration allows us to stay with that experience, to stay with the pain. Like I've said, that we tend to run away from our pain. We deny the fact that there's pain in our body and in our mind. We couldn't stay with it. We just had to do something. We just had to think about something, but not what is really happening in my body, in our mind, in our body, in our mind. And so concentration means to stay with it, to sit with it, to look into it, to experience the rawness of the suffering and the intensity of the suffering. And insight is a clear seeing. It's a seeing not coming from the intellect anymore. It's a seeing that comes from like a gut feeling. It's like, aha, this is it. You know this is it. And it's an understanding of the causes and conditions that brought about the suffering. And it's this understanding that liberates. Yesterday, my sister talked about the practice of stopping and looking deeply to important aspects of meditation. And I like the metaphor of a lake that Thai always talked about. The lake on a clear day, when you look into the pond, you can see reflection of the clouds in it, the blue sky in it. It's as if they're like clear, they're a mirror image of one another, the sky and the water, the pond. But on a windy day or rainy day, when you look into the pond, you see ripples and waves. And it's the same thing with our mind. Our mind is like a pond. That when we are able to stop running inside, running in our head, when we are able to stay with what is unfolding in our body, in our mind, it helps the pond of our mind to become calm and clear, that we can see so deep into it. We can see our suffering, the causes and conditions that bring about the suffering, and when we have a lot of thinking, anxiety, they're just really dark. We can't really see much. Decisions that are made from that place are not really always good decisions. And so stopping is when we are able to come back to ourselves, come back to our breathing, stop running in our head, so that we can really experience what's there in the moment. We can really feel and sense what's there in the present moment. Then the pond of our mind becomes calm and clear, that we can see deeply, and that's called insight. And it's through staying with ourselves that we discover that in us there's the capacity of deep understanding. That is the deep understanding, the insight that liberates us, that transforms our suffering and our pain. We don't have to run out there. We don't have to find it in a teacher. All we need to do is come back to ourselves, come back to our breath, come back to our body, and we can tap into that capacity to understand, to see. We discover many treasures in ourselves, treasures that we have never known that are there, that we have them. So the first exercise, the first 4 exercises, I will talk about the first 4 exercises. The first 4 exercises focus on the body. The breath is part of the body. So the first one is just recognizing there's an in-breath and there's an out-breath, aware of the breathing. It's mere recognition. We don't need to manipulate our breathing or to control it. Just simply acknowledge it for how it is. I breathe in and I know I am breathing in. That this is an in-breath, it's not an out-breath. And I breathe out, I know this is an out-breath. That's an awareness of the breath. And the second one is long and short, which is we're following our breathing, whether it is long, whether it is short, that we follow it from the beginning to the end. When we are able to come in touch with our breathing, when we are able to come back to our breathing, I mean, we breathe all the time, right? And mindfulness of breathing simply means just acknowledging and noticing the breathing. There's no need to intervene with ideas and of how it should be. And when we come back to our breathing, what we recognize is that our mind is so much clearer, and that we're seeing things as if we're seeing them for the first time. We have seen the trees that are in front of our yard. We have been with our beloved ones all their lives, all our lives. But we don't really actually see. We think we see it in our head, but we don't really actually see for what they are and how they are. And so when we come back to our breathing, it helps us to recognize the wonders around us, truly see the wonders around us. In our practice, we're not just talking about suffering, we also talk about joy. That suffering is part of life, but also joy is too. Beauties are all over, all around us. And that we need to come in touch with these beauties and these wonders around us in order to nourish us, in order to cultivate joy in us. And when we see the wonders around us, the beauties around us, we're also able to see the wonders and the beauties inside ourselves. They're just a reflection of our own beauties and wonders, these wonders around us. And so being able to drop our thinking and stay with our breathing, we are able to come in touch with the wonders inside and outside, so that we can be nourished and strengthened by these wonders. So let us enjoy another sound of the bell. The third exercise, we breathe in and we experience the body. We are aware of the body. The body, we bring attention to our body, whatever position it might be, whether it's a sitting position, lying position, walking position. Just bring our attention back and recognize these different positions or movements in our body. And that's enough to make us mindful. We don't need to do anything dramatic to be mindful. When we bring our attention back to our body, when I bring attention back to my body and stay with my body, I feel this sensation running through my body. It's as if it's a sensation of joy. It's as if my body is saying, you have neglected me too long. And just being able to come back gives such joy and such a feeling of well-being in the body. Anybody had experienced that? Like this feeling running through your body of just joy and well-being? Yeah. Thank you. When we come back to our body, when we are aware of our body, it already brings healing and peace to the body, right? So the next exercise is calm in the body. Being present with the body helps our body to be calm. One of the practice that I do is I know suffering in my mind, mental suffering. It's a mental state, but it always manifests on the body. I know there are people who have serious illness or cancer because they had so much suffering in their mind. And they didn't know how to work with it, how to manage their suffering. So it manifests as blocks in the body that eventually became tumorous and cancerous. And so being able to come back to our body and helping our body to rest, we notice that there are suffering in our mind. In other words, we come back and we notice where the suffering is in our body. We localize the body to see where the pain might be. And we go to that part of the body and we breathe with it. Sometimes I live in a community with so many sisters and with so many friends that during the day things come up and I don't really have the time and the space to confront these difficulties. And by the end of the day, or in the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep, I feel like this blockage inside myself, like, you know, right where my navel is, like this huge block. And what I do is that I just acknowledge it, recognize it, and breathe with it. I simply breathe with it without adding the second arrows to that experience. And simply feel that pain or that blockage, even though it may not be clear to me what it is, what had caused it. But I stay with it, I breathe with it, I breathe through it. And gradually, this block, it just melts. It dissipates right in front of my eyes. And it helps me to see deeply into myself, deeply into that block. And a lot of time I realize that this block, this tightness in my body, is coming from a suffering in my mind. And so being with the body, it's not just healing the body, but also healing the suffering in our mind as well. This past summer, we watched an interview of Sister Chen Kong that was made by a French retreatant. And she was speaking, and then you would see scenes of the war, because she was talking about the war in Vietnam, how she came to where she is right now through the war and all the suffering that she experienced. And I was watching it, many of us were watching it, and I felt my heart was beating so fast, and my body was so tense and so stressed. And I don't understand why I was experiencing this stress in my body and tension and tightness, and my heart was beating so fast. I had to leave. And I know many of my sisters experienced that too, the scenes of the war. And I realized that even though I was born toward the end of the war in 1970, and the war ended in 1975, and I never really witnessed the killing or the suffering. I was too young to really witness all the suffering of the war. But the suffering and the fear of my family and of the people had really come into my body, come into my mind. That the suffering of the war is so much a part of who I am right now. And I couldn't make myself to go back and watch that movie anymore, because the pain and the tension and it was just too intense. And it's that experience, this pain in the body or the tension and tightness in the body, that helps me to see that root. I've never really thought about it. I never really thought about how the war had impacted me. I know it had impacted my parents enormously, but I never knew it had such impact on me. And so it's through understanding that I know, through being able to see that, understanding that I know that I have a soft spot in me, and that this soft spot comes from the experience of the war in Vietnam. And so it's through being with ourselves, with our suffering, that we can understand really deeply who we are and how we are and why we are the way we are. And a lot of time our suffering is really coming, like I said, from the environment that we brought up, but also our suffering comes from our parents, ancestors, their suffering becoming a part of us. So I just have to be really patient with myself and not force myself to transform overnight. So if you're not transformed completely after this retreat, don't be too harsh on yourself. There's suffering in us that may take a lifetime to transform, and it's okay. That it's a process, and we have already begun this process by being at a retreat like this. And so Thai talked about the art of happiness. What we will learn during this retreat is the art of happiness, how to cultivate happiness. But the art of happiness is inseparable from the art of suffering. That if we know how to suffer, we can experience happiness. So I'd like to end the sharing here. I'd like to express my gratitude for everyone coming to this retreat, even if Thai physical presence is not here. And that our coming together like this, we're not just generating peace and happiness and healing for ourselves, but the energy, the collective energy of peace, healing, happiness that we're creating together ripples out and it touches life all over around us. It's this energy that comes, that ripples out, and it affects life. So we're not just practicing for ourselves, we're practicing for our family, for our society, and we're practicing for the whole humanity. And this, we need more of this energy of collective awakening, so that the world can suffer less. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here.